Today, we delve into a significant episode from the history of the American West settlement. We will explore an attack on the Union Pacific Railroad by Cheyenne warriors in 1867. This occurred during a tense period following the Civil War, when Plains tribes were actively resisting westward expansion that threatened their way of life. The Cheyenne had been at odds with the U.S. government since the 1864 Sand Creek Massacre, where a peaceful Cheyenne in Arapahoe village in Colorado was brutally attacked by Colorado militia forces. This massacre escalated tensions, leading the Cheyenne to retaliate by raiding settlements in Kansas, Nebraska, and Colorado. By 1867, with fewer attacks on settlements during the intervening years, Cheyenne resistance shifted to opposing infrastructure projects like the Transcontinental Railroad, which symbolized the encroachment of settlers onto their lands. Our narrative today is drawn from the spring 1958 issue of Frontier Times magazine, which featured a story titled The Plum Creek Incident, authored by Carl Ulrich. The magazine, sold for 25 cents, recounted an attack on Union Pacific train workers and the derailment of a train by Cheyenne warriors near present-day Lexington, Nebraska, in August 1867. While Hollywood films often exaggerate or fictionalize such events, the Plum Creek incident remains the only documented case where Plains tribes successfully derailed a railroad train. This attack occurred during the early days of Union Pacific construction, 2 years after the first rail was laid at Omaha, Nebraska, and just 21 months before the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad at Promontory Point, Utah, in May 1869. On August 6, 1867, a section crew at Plum Creek Station was laboring under the hot sun to extend the rail line westward. For the Cheyenne, watching from the nearby brush of the Platte River, the railroad represented a grave threat. They saw how it enabled the mass slaughter of buffalo for hides, leaving their carcasses to rot and depriving the Plains tribes of a critical food and cultural resource. The Cheyenne and other tribes had also witnessed the displacement and suffering of groups like the Omaha, Pawnee, and Odo, who had been forced onto reservations and reduced to poverty, their traditional ways of life obliterated by the encroachment of settlers. Determined to resist, a group of 25 to 40 Cheyenne warriors, reportedly led by the prominent leader Roman Nose, ambushed the work site. As the laborers departed for the day, the Cheyenne dismantled the track by removing spikes, raising rails, and using telegraph wire to secure timber across the rails. They then lay in wait for an oncoming train. When the train struck the sabotage section, it derailed, causing chaos and inflicting significant damage. This act of resistance underscored the desperation and determination of the Cheyenne to defend their land and way of life against overwhelming odds. However, such events also heightened tensions with the U.S. government, leading to further military retaliation and, eventually, the widespread suppression of Plains tribes. By 1868, the conflict escalated into all-out warfare, culminating in the Red Cloud's War and other confrontations that profoundly reshaped the American West. General Christopher C. Auger and I have managed to suppress news of the recent attacks, keeping them out of the press. Both of us are aware of the full scope of the danger, but if the truth were widely known, it could cause panic among the workforce. Stage agents, telegraph operators, immigrants, tie contractors, and all other railroad men in the region are already clamoring for increased protection. At Plum Creek, station agent Sam Wallace greeted the track workers with troubling news. The telegraph line to the west had gone silent around 7:30 that evening. After a quick meal, Wallace assembled a group of workers: Tim DeLahunty, Tim Murphy, Pat Handerhand, John Kern, William Thompson, and Pat Griswold. Armed and equipped with tools, the 7 men set out on a handcar to locate and repair the break in the line. It was approximately 9 p.m. when they noticed a small fire along the north side of the tracks, near the spot where they had been working earlier in the day. While the fire piqued their curiosity, they had no reason to suspect a Cheyenne ambush nearby. They pressed onward, pumping the handcar forward. Then disaster struck. The handcar slammed into a timber tie laid across the rails, derailed, and spilled the 7 men onto the trackside. As they scrambled to regain their footing and retrieve their firearms, a band of Cheyenne warriors, led by the fearsome Roman Nose, emerged from hiding with a thunderous assault. Shouting war cries and firing arrows and rifles, the Cheyenne charged. The railroad crew returned fire but quickly realized they were outmatched. They began a desperate retreat on foot toward Plum Creek Station, more than 3 miles away. However, the Cheyenne's swift and coordinated attack cut off their escape. 3 workers, Pat Handerhand, William Thompson, and Pat Griswold, were isolated as they tried to break through the encirclement. Handerhand was brutally killed, struck down with tomahawks. Thompson was felled by a blow to the head, while Griswold, despite being shot in the hip, managed to slip away from the attackers. The remaining 4 railroaders fought fiercely, killing 1 Cheyenne warrior and wounding another's pony during the skirmish. They eventually made their way back to safety, bringing news of the attack to Plum Creek Station. This harrowing incident served as a grim reminder of the dangers faced by those working on the Transcontinental Railroad during a time of heightened resistance by Plains tribes. The Cheyenne were momentarily stalled, allowing Wallace, Kern, Murphy, and Delahunty to plunge into the rugged terrain under the cover of darkness and successfully make their way back to the relative safety of Plum Creek Station. Meanwhile, back at the ambush site, one of the Cheyenne warriors was in the process of scalping Thompson when a 17-car freight train appeared in the distance. Its square headlamp cast a pale, yellow beam through the night as the locomotive approached from the east. The General Sherman type engine hit the sabotage section of track at about 25 miles per hour. The raised rails caused the train to derail spectacularly, flipping over like a wounded animal. A T-rail pierced through the locomotive's boiler, completely destroying it. The tender was catapulted over the engine, and the first 3 cars, loaded with bricks and coal, piled up behind it. Fireman George Henshaw was killed in the crash, and engineer Brooks Bowers suffered critical injuries. The brakemen, F.L. Barker and Fred Lewis, disappeared during the chaos but were discovered the next day, stranded on an island in the Platte River. Conductor Kinney, miraculously unharmed, realized that a second train was only minutes behind. Acting quickly, he raced along the tracks and flagged the oncoming train to a halt. He boarded the second train, which then reversed to Plum Creek, where it found the 4 surviving handcar crew members. Later that night, Griswold, whose hip wound turned out to be minor, managed to stagger back into the station. He reported that he had escaped after the Cheyenne shifted their attention to the wreckage of the train. Thompson, however, was presumed dead, likely killed and mutilated as Handerhand had been. News of the wreck quickly reached Union Pacific headquarters in Omaha, about 230 miles to the east, via telegraph. Orders were issued to move all remaining personnel to Elm Creek for safety, where they spent the night in a sod building. Headquarters also notified General Augur, who dispatched 2 companies of infantry, one from Omaha and another from North Platte, to secure the site. By morning, the surviving railroad men, bolstered by armed settlers, decided not to wait for the arrival of the troops. Heavily armed, they boarded a train to investigate the situation. As they neared Plum Creek Station, they spotted thick plumes of smoke rising in the distance, signaling that the Cheyenne were still burning the derailed freight cars. Undeterred, the crew coupled a flat car loaded with wooden ties to the front of their engine. Armed men climbed aboard the flat car, ready to confront the Cheyenne and reclaim the site. As the makeshift armored train rolled cautiously down the tracks, the men aboard noticed a figure stumbling along the right-of-way. The man was dressed only in a blood-soaked shirt, William Thompson. His head, gruesomely scalped, was caked with dried and blackened blood under the hot morning sun. One witness described it as the most horrifying sight he had ever seen, one he hoped never to witness again. Thompson was quickly brought aboard the train. Once somewhat stabilized, Thompson recounted his ordeal. After regaining consciousness during the night, he found himself abandoned while the Cheyenne warriors were looting and burning the train cars. Seizing the opportunity, he crawled away into the darkness and hid until daylight. The train stopped as it neared the smoldering remains of the derailed freight cars. Using a spyglass, the men observed the Cheyenne still celebrating their victory. Warriors with strips of colorful calico tied to their ponytails raced about, whooping and yelling in triumph. Others stomped in a victory dance, wearing boots taken from the wreck, their bottoms cut off and fashioned into leggings over their moccasined feet. Around 2 barrels of whiskey, they reveled in their conquest, using the white man's firewater to toast their success against the iron monster, whose vulnerability they had finally exposed. Patrick Delaney, armed with a .50-70 caliber rifle, took aim and shot one of the warriors. The Cheyenne responded by gathering their dead and retreating, shouting their defiance and derision as they rode away. The rescue party began sifting through the debris and discovered Engineer Brooks Bowers still alive, though horribly mangled. He was found hanging by one leg from the side of the locomotive's cab, his scalp taken. Despite their efforts to save him, Bowers succumbed to his injuries shortly after being freed. Among the wreckage, the rescuers found scattered supplies, new boots, dry goods, coffee, sugar, and, gruesomely, a human scalp. When the long auburn hair was shown to Thompson, he identified it as his own. In an extraordinary attempt to restore what he had lost, Thompson preserved his scalp in a pail of salt water and carried it with him when he was sent to Omaha for medical treatment. He hoped that through some miracle of surgery, it might be reattached. William Thompson's hopes of having his scalp reattached were, of course, dashed. Dr. R.C. Moore, who treated Thompson, presented the case at the second annual meeting of the Nebraska State Medical Society, providing the following report. William Thompson, an employee of the Union Pacific Railroad, was scalped by Cheyenne Indians near Plum Creek Station on the night of August 6, 1867. He was placed under my care on the morning of the 8th, approximately 36 hours after the wounds were inflicted. The scalp was entirely removed from a space measuring 9 inches by 7. The exposed area extended from 1 inch above the left eyebrow backward across the head. Additionally, he sustained a severe tomahawk wound and a slight gunshot wound through the fleshy part of his right arm. Although the wound secretion was profuse, Thompson, being strong and in excellent health, made a rapid recovery. Dr. Moore further noted that Thompson experienced severe neuralgic pain on the right side of his head and face, but within 3 months, the pain subsided, and the majority of the exposed area had healed with scar tissue. After his recovery, Thompson returned to his homeland, declaring that the American West had proven far more than he had bargained for. However, he left behind a grim reminder of his ordeal, his scalp. Thompson donated it to Dr. Moore, who preserved it in a sealed glass bell. It is now held at the Omaha Public Library, a striking memento of the only documented instance where the Plains Indians successfully derailed a train before the railroad's expansion irrevocably altered their way of life. The Cheyenne's decision to leave Thompson's scalp at the scene remains a mystery. Perhaps it was overlooked in their haste to escape the rescue party's gunfire, or perhaps it was abandoned by mistake. Given the importance of scalps as trophies, it seems unlikely they would willingly leave it behind. This dramatic incident foreshadowed larger conflicts to come. Approximately 1 year later, all-out war would erupt, with figures like the Cheyenne leader Roman Nose playing significant roles in raids and battles against settlers in Kansas and Nebraska. Roman Nose would ultimately meet his fate in these conflicts. Another notable Cheyenne, Henry Romanos, was only a teenager during the Plum Creek events. While it's unclear if he was related to Roman Nose, Henry Romanos would later become a chief and a strong advocate for education and training, especially as the Cheyenne adapted to life on reservations. Thank you for joining, where we explore overlooked but vital moments from our past. By drawing directly from old books, magazines, and other historical sources, we aim to keep the richness of history alive. If you'd like to support our efforts, consider joining our Patreon or becoming a channel member for $5 per month. You'll gain access to exclusive content and be recognized for helping to promote real history. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more episodes, and we'll see you next time.